Mark adjusted the straps of his armor as he stood near the grand palace gates. The air shimmered with color as banners of the alien kingdom waved in the breeze. He had been sent here not as a warrior, but as part of a small human guard force observing peace talks between Earth and the alien royal family. The mission was supposed to be simple. Watch, stand tall, and do nothing more. The palace itself was like nothing he had seen on Earth. Its tall silver towers reflected the sunlight and made the sky look brighter. Bridges of crystal stretched from tower to tower, glowing faintly as if alive. Alien attendants in flowing robes moved through the halls, preparing for the arrival of leaders. Mark kept his eyes steady. Though he admired the beauty, he knew his task was to remain alert. Inside the main hall, music filled the air. Alien nobles had gathered in elegant rows, their strange clothes shining with threads of light. Mark stood near the edge of the gathering, his hand resting on the side of his weapon, though it remained locked in safety. His eyes scanned the room, as soldiers do, always waiting for something unseen. Then came the princess. Lyra entered the hall surrounded by attendants, her presence drawing every gaze. She was young, her steps graceful but uncertain, as if she still carried the weight of learning how to walk in the shadow of royalty. Her skin shimmered with a faint glow, her eyes bright with curiosity. Mark noticed how the crowd bowed as she passed. Even from a distance, he saw that she looked nervous, though she carried herself with dignity. Mark shifted his stance, reminding himself not to stare. He was here for duty, not for admiration. The peace ceremony began. The queen herself rose on a platform at the center, her voice calm yet powerful. She spoke of unity between her people and Earth. Her words filled the chamber, and though Mark did not understand every phrase, he could feel the weight of history in that moment. Perhaps he thought this was the start of a new age, one where humans and aliens would stand side by side. But peace rarely comes so easily. Without warning, the great doors of the hall burst open. The music stopped. Cries echoed as a group of armed raiders stormed inside. Their armor was dark, their faces hidden by masks. They moved with deadly speed, weapons raised, shouting in a language Mark could not fully understand. Chaos spread instantly. Nobles fled to the sides. Guards rushed forward but were struck down by blasts of energy. The queen remained on the platform, her voice commanding her soldiers to hold the line, but the raiders pressed deeper into the hall. Their eyes were not on the queen nor the crowd. They were on the princess. Mark saw it at once. Lyra froze as the raiders cut through her attendants. Her guards fell around her. The crowd screamed, scattering, leaving her exposed. Time slowed for Mark. He had no orders to interfere. He was not supposed to act, but when he saw the young princess trembling, her wide eyes locked on the attackers rushing toward her, he made his choice. Mark moved. He sprinted across the hall, pushing past fleeing nobles, his boots striking the polished floor. One of the raiders raised a weapon toward the princess. Without thought, Mark threw himself forward, crashing between her and the blast. The energy struck his armor, sending a surge of heat across his chest. He gritted his teeth, shielding her with his own body. The princess gasped. Mark turned his head just enough to see her staring at him in shock. As if she could not believe a human soldier would risk himself for her, the raiders shouted, trying to force their way closer, but Mark stood firm. He drew his weapon and fired back, not with wild rage but with careful precision. His shots cut through the air, forcing the raiders to scatter behind fallen pillars. Alien guards regrouped beside him, their courage renewed by his stand. The hall became a battlefield. Smoke filled the air. Broken glass rained down from shattered windows. Through it all, Mark kept himself in front of the princess, his arms steady, his eyes sharp. He could hear her breathing behind him, quick and frightened, yet trusting that he would not move aside. More raiders fell. The guards pressed forward, driving the attackers back toward the doors. A final shout rang out, and the invaders retreated, dragging their wounded with them. The great doors slammed shut as the last of them vanished into the city. Silence followed. Mark lowered his weapon, his chest heaving. His armor was scorched, his arm trembling from the impact of the blast he had taken. Slowly he turned to face the princess. She stood with wide eyes, her hands clutching her gown, her lips parted but unable to form words. For a long moment she only stared at him. Then the queen approached. Surrounded by her surviving guards, she moved to her daughter's side. Her eyes, sharp and glowing with authority, settled on Mark. The hall was filled with whispers as nobles watched the scene unfold. The queen spoke, her voice low but steady. A human soldier shields my blood. This is not a small act. This is a bond. Mark bowed his head slightly, unsure what she meant but feeling the weight of her gaze. He had only done what felt right. Yet he realized in that instant that his life had changed. He had stepped beyond orders, beyond protocol, and into something far greater. The attack had ended, but it was only the beginning. The great hall still carried the smell of smoke and scorched stone. Shattered crystal lay scattered across the polished floor where the fight had taken place. Guards worked quickly to remove the wounded while attendants tried to calm the nobles. Yet even in the noise and confusion, all eyes kept glancing toward the tall human soldier standing near the princess. Mark stood straight, though his armor was burned from the blast he had taken. His hand still rested on his weapon, ready in case the raiders returned. But the immediate danger was gone. Now the weight of silence pressed on him. He had stepped beyond his orders. He had interfered when he should not have. A part of him expected human command to scold him, or perhaps even remove him from his post. But then the queen stepped forward. Queen Serenia moved through the shaken court with calm power. She wore no crown, yet the aura around her was heavier than gold. Her robes, marked with the colors of her people, trailed behind her like flowing rivers of light. She stopped before her daughter, checking that the young princess was unhurt. Lyrae bowed her head, trying to hide her trembling hands, but the queen touched her shoulder gently, a silent comfort. Then her eyes turned to Mark. The hall grew quiet again. Even the wounded seemed to pause their groans. All waited to hear what the queen would say. Mark bowed his head out of respect.
"Your Majesty," he said slowly, trying not to let his voice shake.
"I only did what I thought was right." The queen studied him, her gaze sharp and thoughtful. "You shielded my daughter with your own body," she said. Her voice carried across the chamber, clear and unshaken. "Your orders did not demand this, yet you placed yourself between her and death." Mark hesitated. He was a soldier. Protecting others was his duty, even if it was not written in his mission. "I could not stand aside," he answered simply. A murmur spread through the court. Some nobles nodded in approval. Others whispered with doubt, their faces hard and distrustful. A human had acted boldly in a place where even many of them had frozen in fear. It was not something easily ignored. The queen lifted her hand, silencing the whispers. "In our law," she said, "such an act is not small. To shield one of royal blood is to bind oneself in honor. You have stepped into a place few would dare. Do you understand this, human soldier?" Mark's chest tightened. He understood enough to know she was not merely thanking him. She was binding him to something greater, something he could not easily walk away from. He glanced at the princess. Lyrae's wide eyes were still fixed on him. She looked both grateful and uncertain, as if she too did not know what this moment would mean. Mark bowed again. "If it is seen as honor, then I accept," he said, though part of him wondered what trouble this would bring when word reached Earth. The queen's expression softened, only slightly. "Then you will remain," she declared. "You will stand by the princess until I release you. My court may question it, other leaders may challenge it. But the truth is clear. When danger came, you did not flee. You earned your place beside her." The crowd erupted in voices. Some cheered. Others protested. A few even shouted that tradition was being broken. Mark stood silent through it all, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. He had not asked for this role, but he could not deny it either. Princess Lyrae stepped forward, her voice soft yet steady. "Mother," she said, bowing her head slightly. "He saved me when even my guards fell. If anyone deserves to remain, it is him." Her words silenced many who had doubted. The queen placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder once more, then looked back at Mark. "So it is decided." From that moment, his position changed. He was no longer only a human observer. He was tied to the royal family in a way no other outsider had ever been. Later, when the hall began to clear, Mark stood near the balcony, gazing out over the alien city. Towers of silver stretched into the clouds, glowing softly as night approached. He heard footsteps and turned to see the princess approaching. "You should not have done it," Lyrae said, though her voice carried more gratitude than reproach. "You could have died." Mark gave a faint smile. "Better me than you." The princess looked down at her hands, quiet for a moment. Then she lifted her gaze again. "Still, I am glad you did. When the blast came, I thought it was the end. But then you stood there as if nothing could move you." Mark shook his head. I was afraid too. I just moved before I could think. Lyrae gave the smallest of smiles, one filled with both relief and curiosity. My people will never forget what you did. My mother will never forget. She sees more in you than even you may see in yourself. Her words lingered in his mind long after she left. Mark returned his gaze to the city below. He knew Earth Command would not take this lightly. To them, he was supposed to be temporary, a guest with no ties. But now he was more than that. The Queen had bound him with honor, and the princess herself seemed to trust him already. For better or worse, Mark's life was no longer his own, and deep inside, he sensed that this bond, born in the fire of an attack, would lead him down a path he could never have imagined. The days after the attack passed slowly, yet the memory of that night never faded from the palace. Guards doubled their patrols, and walls that once felt open now carried the tension of hidden threats. But within that unease, something new began to form. Mark was no longer seen as just an outsider soldier. By the Queen's order, he was now the official protector of Princess Lyrae. At first, he struggled with the weight of it. He had been trained to follow human command, not to serve an alien royal. Yet every morning he found himself walking beside the princess, watching over her as she moved through the crystal halls, across the shining bridges, and into the gardens that stretched like living jewels. Princess Lyrae was curious about him. At first she remained quiet, shy, and distant. She carried herself with the grace expected of her title, but her eyes betrayed the questions she wanted to ask. Mark noticed the way she glanced at him during meals, or the way she slowed her steps when they walked, waiting for him to catch up. One morning, as the two walked through a long corridor lined with glowing murals, Lyrae finally spoke. "You do not walk like my guards," she said softly. Mark glanced at her. "How so?" "You move as if you are not only protecting me but watching the whole world at once," she explained. "My guards look forward. You look everywhere." Mark allowed a small smile. "Habit. On Earth we are trained to never trust that danger comes from only one direction." The princess nodded thoughtfully, her silver hair catching the morning light. "That must be tiring." "Sometimes," Mark admitted. "But it keeps us alive. That was the beginning." From then on, their walks became filled with quiet exchanges. Lyrae asked about Earth, about its oceans and forests, about the way humans lived without towers of crystal or bridges of light. Mark answered as simply as he could, describing rain falling against rooftops, children running across fields, and the sound of waves against stone. She listened with wide eyes as though each detail was a treasure. In return, Lyrae shared pieces of her own world. She told him about the gardens that bloomed only under moonlight, about festivals where the sky was painted with fire that danced without burning, and about her lessons in leadership. Though she was young, the burden of becoming her people's future rested heavily on her shoulders. Mark could see it in the way she sometimes paused mid-sentence, as if unsure whether she was speaking as a girl or as a princess. As the days stretched into weeks, Mark noticed something else. The Queen often watched them. From the balcony, from the throne, or even during meals, her eyes would linger on the human soldier standing beside her daughter. She said little, but her silence carried meaning. Some nobles still frowned at his presence, but none dared challenge the Queen's command. One evening, Mark stood with Lyrae in the royal garden. The night sky shimmered with strange constellations, stars unfamiliar to human eyes. The garden glowed with plants that pulsed faintly, as if alive with gentle fire. "Do you miss your home?" Lyrae asked suddenly. Mark thought for a moment before answering. "Yes, I miss the faces I know, the air I grew up breathing. But duty keeps me here. And if you had the choice," she pressed. He looked at her, seeing the honesty in her gaze. "If I had the choice, I would still stand where I am now. Because leaving you unguarded does not sit right with me." Her cheeks colored faintly, though she quickly turned her face toward the glowing trees. "You speak with simple words, but they carry weight." Mark chuckled lightly. "That is all a soldier can offer. Simple words and steady hands." The princess smiled then, a small smile that seemed rare for her. For the first time, Mark realized she trusted him, not only as a shield, but as a companion. Later that week, a small group of children from the city visited the palace for a ceremony. Mark noticed how the children crowded around Lyrae, some shy, others bold enough to tug at her sleeves. She laughed gently, guiding them with kindness, showing them the gardens as if she were already their leader. Mark stood nearby, watching carefully, but also struck by how natural she seemed among them. One child pointed at Mark and asked, "Is he yours?" Lyrae paused, then laughed softly.
"No, he is not mine."
"But he is here for me." The child nodded with innocent acceptance, and the words lingered in Mark's mind long after. That night, as he sat alone polishing his armor, he thought about those words. Not mine, but here for me. Perhaps that was the truth of it. He was not of her world, not bound by blood or law, yet every step he took now circled around her safety. Still, doubts lingered in his mind. What would Earth Command think of this growing bond? Would they see it as betrayal or as strength? He did not know, but deep inside he felt that something larger was forming, something neither side had expected. The bond between a human soldier and an alien princess was no longer just about duty. It was about trust, about learning, and about seeing one another as more than titles. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both knew that their connection was only growing stronger with each passing day. The palace had returned to its normal rhythm on the surface, but under the polished floors and glowing towers, unease was spreading like a shadow. Mark's presence beside Princess Lyrae had not gone unnoticed. Every noble, every court advisor, every servant had seen how the queen herself declared him as her daughter's protector. For some it was a sign of honor. For others it was a wound to tradition. Mark could feel it in the way eyes followed him as he walked the halls. Whispers floated in the air, spoken in voices that thought he could not hear. Some called him brave. Others called him a mistake. The alien guards gave him respectful nods, but nobles often turned their heads, as if his very presence insulted them. One afternoon, Mark stood guard at the edge of the throne chamber while the queen held council. The room was filled with nobles dressed in bright robes, their clothing stitched with glowing threads that marked their rank. Lyrae sat quietly beside her mother, hands folded neatly in her lap. A tall noble with golden bands across his arms rose to speak. His voice was smooth, but his tone carried sharpness. "Your Majesty," he began, bowing deeply, "we honor your wisdom and your strength. Yet there are matters that trouble the court. This human soldier, though brave, is an outsider. He walks where no outsider should walk. He stands beside the princess where only our own blood should stand." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber. Others nodded, their eyes flashing with pride wounded by Mark's place near the throne. The queen's gaze did not falter. "He saved my daughter's life," she answered firmly. When others faltered, he stood firm. "Is that not worth honor?" Another noble, a woman with silver scales across her neck, rose to her feet. "Yes, he acted with courage. But courage alone does not give one the right to stand among us. If word spreads that the heir of our people is guarded by a human, what will other kingdoms think? They will see it as weakness, as if we cannot protect our own." Mark kept his posture steady, though each word pressed against him like stone. He had faced battlefields before, but this was a different kind of fight. Here weapons were words, and every glance was sharper than a blade. Princess Lyrae finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying across the chamber. "He did not ask for this place. I asked for it. When I was alone, when all else fell, he stood in front of me. If the court cannot honor that, then what do we honor?" The chamber fell into silence for a moment. The queen's lips curved into the faintest hint of approval at her daughter's defense. But the resistance was not over. A third noble stepped forward, his cloak heavy with jewels. "Your Majesty, forgive me, but this bond you speak of is dangerous. Bonds can become chains. What if this human chooses his own people over us? What if Earth uses him as a tool to bend our will?" The queen rose slowly from her throne. Her presence filled the hall like a wave of power. "You question his loyalty," she said. "But tell me, when the raiders stormed this very chamber, where were your words then? Did any of you stand in front of my daughter? No, it was he, the one you call outsider, who shielded her. None of you placed your body between her and death, yet you question his place." The nobles lowered their heads, their voices quiet. Mark felt the weight of the queen's defense pressing against him. It was not only protection, it was responsibility. She was not merely keeping him in her court. She was placing him above many who had known her their whole lives. That thought unsettled him, yet also filled him with a strange sense of duty he could not turn away from. After the council ended, Mark followed the princess through the gardens. Lyrae walked in silence at first, her hands brushing the glowing petals of the flowers that bloomed in the twilight. "They do not like you," she said finally, her voice tinged with sadness. "I noticed, Mark replied with a small shrug. "It is not the first time I have been unwelcome." "But it is not fair," she said, turning toward him. "They see only that you are human. They refuse to see what you did for me, what you keep doing." Mark stopped walking, looking at her with calm eyes. "It does not matter if they like me. What matters is that you are safe. That is why I am here." Her expression softened, though her eyes still carried the weight of worry. "Sometimes I fear they will try to take you away, even if my mother commands otherwise." Mark looked toward the distant towers, their silver spires glowing against the night sky. "Then I will stand my ground," he said simply. "If I could face the raiders, I can face words." The princess smiled faintly at that, a smile mixed with pride and relief. What neither of them noticed was that in the shadows of the garden, a pair of nobles watched with narrowed eyes. They whispered to one another, their voices filled with cold intent. To them, the queen's favor toward the human was dangerous, and dangerous things, they believed, needed to be removed. As the night deepened, Mark felt the weight of unseen eyes on his back. He did not know what plans were forming among the nobles, but he sensed that his greatest battle in the palace had only just begun. The palace buzzed with tension after the queen's bold defense of Mark. The nobles did not forget her words, and many carried their frustration into whispered meetings behind closed doors. But while they schemed in silence, news of the human soldier's new position spread beyond the walls of the kingdom. It did not take long for Earth to learn of what had happened. Mark had expected it. The queen had bound him to the princess in front of her court. That moment was far too public to remain hidden. Soon after, messages began to arrive from human command. They did not congratulate him. They did not praise his bravery. Instead, they summoned him for questioning. The queen refused. When Earth's envoys arrived at the palace, the throne chamber filled once again with tension. The human envoys wore sharp uniforms, their badges gleaming. They walked with practiced steps, their faces set with seriousness. Mark stood near the princess as always, but his chest tightened as he saw the anger in their eyes. The lead envoy, a man named Colonel Reeves, bowed stiffly to the queen before speaking. "Your Majesty, we thank you for your hospitality, but we must address a matter that has caused deep concern to Earth." The queen inclined her head slightly. "Speak." Reeves turned his gaze to Mark, his voice sharp. "This soldier is under Earth's authority. His orders were clear: observe, protect when necessary, and return. Yet he has been bound to your princess as if he were part of your royal guard. That was never agreed upon. We demand his immediate release into our custody." The nobles in the chamber stirred, some hiding smiles, others watching with hungry eyes. The conflict between the queen and Earth was exactly the drama they had hoped for. Mark clenched his fists. He wanted to speak, but protocol demanded silence. The queen rose from her throne, her presence commanding silence across the hall. "Colonel Reeves," she said slowly, her voice calm but edged with steel. "This soldier saved my daughter when your own envoys could not move. He placed himself between her and death. By the law of my people, he has earned his place. Do you expect me to ignore that? Do you expect me to cast aside honor because it troubles your politics?" Reeves straightened his shoulders. "With respect, your Majesty, he is not yours to keep. He belongs to Earth." The queen's eyes narrowed. "He belongs to no one. He chose to act when all others hesitated. That choice makes him more than property. It makes him a guardian." The chamber erupted with murmurs again. Mark's heart pounded. He knew every word spoken here would shape his future. Finally, the queen turned to him directly. "Mark," she said, her voice echoing through the hall, "do you wish to return to Earth? Speak plainly." All eyes fell on him. He felt the weight of his commander's stares, the noble's suspicion, the princess's hope. His throat was dry, but his voice came steady. "No, your Majesty. My place is here. I will not abandon the princess." The colonel's face hardened, but the queen smiled faintly. "Then it is decided," she declared. "He stays." The words struck the chamber like a hammer. Nobles gasped. Envoys stiffened. Even Princess Lyrae sat straighter, her eyes bright with relief. Reeves stepped forward, his tone sharp. "This decision will strain the alliance. You risk peace itself." The queen's voice remained steady. "Peace cannot exist without trust. And trust cannot exist without honor. If Earth does not understand that, then perhaps it is Earth that risks peace." The human envoys could say little more. They bowed stiffly, their faces dark with anger, and left the hall. The sound of the doors closing echoed like thunder. Afterward, the queen dismissed the court. Mark remained near the throne, still processing what had happened. He had chosen. He had spoken his will before two worlds, and now there was no turning back. When the hall was empty, Princess Lyrae approached him. Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. "You chose us." Mark looked at her, then nodded. "Yes, I chose you." Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles, one filled with relief. "Then I will not let them take you away. Neither will my mother." That night, Mark stood on the balcony, staring at the alien stars. He thought of Earth, of his comrades, of the world he had left behind. For the first time, he wondered if he would ever see it again. But the image that filled his mind was not Earth's sky. It was the look in Lyrae's eyes when he spoke his choice. He had tied his fate to hers, and though he did not know what storms would come, he felt no regret. Far below, hidden in the shadows of the city, the raiders who had attacked before whispered their own plans. The human soldier's bond to the princess had become a symbol, and symbols could be dangerous. They would strike again, harder than before, and Mark knew, deep in his chest, that the hardest trial of his loyalty was yet to come. The morning sun shimmered across the silver towers of the palace, casting long reflections across the crystal bridges. For Mark, it was a moment of calm that felt temporary, almost fragile. He knew it would not last. The raiders who had attacked the palace before were not finished, and whispers in the city suggested they were gathering strength for a second strike. Mark walked beside Princess Lyrae through the palace corridors. Her steps were steady, her expression determined, but he could sense a subtle tension in her movements. Even with the queen's protection, the young princess knew danger could arrive at any time. "My mother said we must be ready," Lyrae said softly. "But sometimes I feel powerless." Mark shook his head. "You are not powerless. You have people who will fight for you, and I will stand with you, always." Lyrae glanced at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and concern. "It is not just about fighting," she said. "It is about trust. The court watches you, and even my people have doubts." Mark nodded. "Then we show them what loyalty means, not with words but with action." That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, the first alarm sounded. Crystal walls vibrated with warning pulses, signaling intruders approaching the palace gates. The raiders had returned, far larger in number than before. Mark immediately moved to position near the princess. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. Lyrae obeyed, her hand brushing lightly against his arm for reassurance. The queen appeared quickly on the balcony above, her commanding presence inspiring the guards. "Defend the princess!" she shouted. "Protect her life at all costs." Mark's pulse quickened. The raiders poured through the gates, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Some had strange mechanical devices strapped to their backs, firing beams that shattered walls. Human weapons alone could not stop them, and the alien guards struggled to hold the line. Mark did not hesitate. He charged forward, placing himself between Lyrae and the advancing enemies. His training took over, his mind calculating each move with precision. He directed guards to hold positions, covered the princess when she had to move, and fired with accuracy that surprised even the most experienced alien soldiers. Lyrae watched him, her heart pounding as he took each step with courage and control. He was no longer simply a human soldier. In the eyes of the palace, he had become a symbol of unwavering loyalty, a guardian who would face any threat to her life. The raiders closed in, and Mark noticed a group attempting to break through a side entrance to reach the princess. Without thinking, he ran to intercept them, fighting with a combination of human skill and quick thinking adapted to the alien architecture. Beams of energy flew past him, striking walls and floors, but he stayed focused. Every strike, every movement was to shield Lyrae. One raider lunged directly at him, and Mark caught the weapon with both hands, twisting it away. The impact sent a shock through his arms, but he did not falter. With a strong push, he sent the raider stumbling back, giving Lyrae just enough time to retreat behind a protective barrier. The battle raged across the palace, with Mark at its center. The queen's guards followed his lead, inspired by his courage. Even some of the nobles who had doubted him before now fought alongside him, realizing that true loyalty was shown in action, not in rank or bloodline. At one point, the raiders targeted a group of children who had come with the princess to the garden earlier. Without hesitation, Mark ran to intercept, forming a human shield and guiding them to safety. His actions demonstrated that protection extended beyond the princess to all those who were vulnerable. Finally, after hours that seemed like days, the raiders began to retreat. Their numbers were diminished, their morale broken. Mark stood in the center of the courtyard, sweat and grime covering him, yet he did not step away from the princess. Lyrae approached him cautiously, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "You fought for more than me," she said quietly. "You fought for everyone in this palace." Mark shook his head. "I fought for what was right, and I will continue to fight as long as I can." The queen descended from the balcony, her expression one of deep pride. "Mark," she said, her voice carrying through the courtyard, "you have proven your loyalty beyond question. Not as a human, not as an outsider, but as a guardian of my people. Your choice to stand with us shows the strength of your heart." Mark bowed, exhausted but honored. "Your Majesty, I only did what I had to do." "No," the queen replied firmly. "You did more than that. You chose where you belong, and that choice has changed the destiny of this palace. You have earned a place here beside the princess in a way no one can take away." Lyrae looked up at him with admiration and respect, her earlier fear replaced by quiet confidence. "I knew you would not falter," she said. Mark allowed himself a small smile, though he knew the trials were far from over. The raiders would return, and the world outside the palace still carried uncertainties. Yet in that moment, he understood that loyalty was not only about standing in front of danger, it was about choosing to remain when it mattered most, even when the world expected him to walk away. And in the eyes of the queen and the princess, Mark had proven that humanity could stand shoulder to shoulder with the bravest of alien warriors. The palace had returned to a fragile calm. The raiders' retreat had left the courtyard scarred, and the walls bore scratches of the intense battle. Yet, for the first time in weeks, the atmosphere inside the palace felt lighter. The Queen's court had witnessed the bravery of a human soldier, and whispers of doubt were replaced with murmurs of respect. Mark walked beside Princess Lyrae through the garden. The air was filled with the scent of blooming alien flowers, soft light pulsing from petals that opened under the twilight sky. Lyrae's hand brushed against his arm, a silent gesture of trust and gratitude. "You were amazing today," she said, her voice calm but filled with warmth. Mark shook his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips. "I only did my duty." "No," Lyrae replied firmly. "You did more than duty. You chose to stay when leaving was easier. You stood with us when others could not. That is why you are here." Mark glanced toward the palace, seeing the queen observing them from the balcony. Her posture was steady, her gaze sharp, yet it carried approval. It was rare to see the queen display such emotion openly, but her expression told Mark everything he needed to know. She recognized his courage, his loyalty, and the bond he had formed with her daughter. Later, the queen summoned him to the throne room. Nobles and guards had gathered, curious to witness the acknowledgement of Mark's role in the palace. The air was tense, as if the walls themselves held their breath. "Mark," the queen began, her voice calm but commanding, "the bond you have formed with my daughter cannot be measured in words. You have earned more than honor. You have earned trust, loyalty, and a place in this palace. From this day forward, you are protector not only of the princess but of all who reside here." Mark bowed his head, humbled. "Your Majesty, I do not seek titles. I only wish to protect." The queen's eyes softened. "Protection is more than a duty. It is a choice, and you have chosen well. Your loyalty proves that courage knows no origin, that bravery is not limited by species. Humanity has shown its strength in you, and for that I will not let you go." The nobles shifted in their seats, some surprised, some impressed. Even those who had questioned Mark's presence before could not deny the truth in the queen's words. Action spoke louder than tradition, and Mark's actions had spoken volumes. The princess stepped forward, her eyes bright. "Mark, we will not let you leave. Not as long as you choose to stay here. You have become more than a soldier. You have become part of us." Mark felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of belonging he had never experienced. He had left Earth as a human soldier, an observer in a world not his own. Yet through courage, loyalty, and simple choices, he had earned a place beside an alien princess and within a royal court. The queen approached him and placed a ceremonial emblem upon his chest, a symbol of honor and belonging. The glow from the emblem matched the light in her eyes. "This is more than a token," she said. "It is a reminder that you are bound to this palace, not by law but by trust and loyalty. You have chosen your path, and it is one we honor. Mark straightened, feeling the weight of the emblem and the responsibility it represented. He looked at the princess, then at the queen, and understood fully what his choice had meant. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace, Mark and Lyrae walked through the gardens again. The battle was over, but the world outside remained uncertain. Yet within the walls of the palace a new bond had been forged, one stronger than fear, stronger than tradition, and stronger than doubt. You have changed everything, Lyrae said softly. For me, for the palace, for everyone, Mark shook his head. We changed it together. You trusted me when others doubted. You stood beside me in ways I could not have imagined. Lyrae smiled, a mixture of pride and relief. Then we stand together, always. Mark looked out at the city beyond the palace walls. The towers reflected the light of the twin moons, and the streets were quiet now, though he knew challenges would come again. The raiders might return. Political pressures from Earth could continue. Yet none of that mattered as much as this moment. Here he had a place, a purpose, and a bond that no force could break. He turned back to the princess, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. He felt calm, ready for whatever future awaited. For the first time he understood what it meant to belong, to a world not his own, yet somehow his home. That night, as the palace lights dimmed and the stars reflected in the crystal towers, the queen watched from her balcony. She saw the human soldier standing beside her daughter, and she smiled faintly, knowing that the bond between them had not only saved her princess, but had strengthened the palace itself. Humanity, once distant and uncertain, had found a lasting place in her kingdom, and Mark knew deep in his heart that he would never leave. Not because he was bound by duty alone, but because he had chosen to stand where he truly belonged. The palace slept under the quiet glow of alien moons, and within its walls, a new chapter had begun, one of trust, courage, and an unbreakable bond between a human soldier and an alien princess.